Okay, so the source photo today is a photo I took in Chile. This is just a lake, beautiful lake that we stopped at, and I took some photos. This water was crystal blue, so that when you printed it out, that blue might look a little really bright, and that's really that's what I think is the beautiful part about this place, because it was very monotone, but the water was very, very blue. So this is our image, and I printed it out. And then I've got some cold press paper. Cold press has a tooth to it, so I don't know if you might be able to see. There's like a texture. Cold press paper, when it goes through when it goes through the mill, the water is cold, and so when it squeezes out of the mill, there's some rough fibers that are just sort of loosely packed, and um, I like cold press for landscapes because they have it gives the surface a natural texture. You could also use hot press. Hot press is it's just the opposite of cold press. It's just it's hot water that runs the paper through the press, and it flattens out all the fibers, so it makes it a lot more compact, and it takes just a slightly bit longer for water to settle into the fibers. Um, and so, you could get a lot of like really interesting detail work, especially if you're working with mixed media. But today is cold press. And the heavier the weight, just so you know, the heavier the weight, the better. This is, I think, 150 pounds, but like your standard normal copy paper is like 50 pounds or something like that. So whenever you're working with watercolor, if you're working with a very thin paper or a light pound, you're going to want to tape down the sides so that it doesn't buckle as you're working. I just taped it down so that I can make it mobile, so I could show you the details as I'm painting. Some of the other tools that I have with me, I'm hoping you have them too, is some paper towels. Got little tin of water here. This is just this is a sponge that I use to wipe off excess water. And then I've got my palette, a couple paints. The paints that I have, I'm just using the standard 3-color and then black. So I've got ivory black, and then I've got ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson and cadmium yellow. So those are my 3 watercolor primary colors. And then I've got my value, which is my ivory black. And you see they're from 3 different companies. Okay, now for them to sort of work and play well together, I'm going to show you a trick to help unify your colors right from the start. So you have a little color harmony. And then I've got a couple brushes, this is a mop brush, which I like to use at the very beginning to get my paper wet. And then I've got another soft bristle brush here. It's a little stiffer. And then I have a soft flat brush, which is about a 1/2 inch. And then a little round brush, which has a nice tip on it. And then I also have a pencil just to sort of sketch out um, my picture here. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to take my pencil and I'm just going to sort of draw where my general shapes are. And you can see if we were to fold this paper in half, kind of lining up. It's a little askew, so I'm going to fold it so that it's in the right way. So that I fold it into quarters. I have a better sense of where the placement is on everything. Forgive my dog, the trash man's here. That's her enemy. Okay, so as you can see, when you fold it in quarters, you've got your halfway mark here, and that little bubble there of that mountain is my halfway point. So I'm going to try to find that halfway point here on my paper. And then I'm just going to sort of sketch out where everything is. She's very unhappy with the trash man. I'm sorry. And then you're just sort of lightly penciling in what you got here, your scene. And then you got some interesting tracks in the dirt. And it's almost like right here, you can make a direct line for the path in the dirt here, all the way up to where that mountain goes up. So try to find the angles that help to guide your composition. And then you've got some clouds here and some clouds up here. Comes down. Now with pencil and watercolor, you can always erase the pencil lines, but just don't go too dark. I'm going a little dark just so that you guys can see. So you can see what I've got going on here. But that's a good start. And with watercolor, there's a couple different approaches you can make. I'm not using white gouache today, unless I find that there's some tiny little details that I want to highlight. Then I'll add some white back. But for the most part, the beauty of watercolor is using the white of the paper, and kind of doing an additive sort of a process where you start with the lightest color first and you move into your darkest darks. Okay, so the trick for my color harmony, for my three colors, these are, like I said, three primary colors from three different places. One way to harmonize these colors so that they all play well together is I'm going to set up my palette, and my palette's going to have, I'm going to put yellow here and yellow here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of build a brown, adding the color here. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. So I put yellow, I put blue, and then I'm going to put blue in with my yellow. And then I've got my alizarin crimson. And then I'm going to place my alizarin crimson here too.
What if you're using pan watercolors?
If you're using pan watercolors, you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to scrub the brush,
Okay.
get up a lot of pigment, and then you're going to create it in another puddle. Okay. And I'm just going to pre-mix this just so that you see what this looks like. So I've got my yellow, I've got my ultramarine blue, and I've got my alizarin crimson. And this is what I'm going to do to harmonize my colors. I'm going to stir this all together to create this muddy color, because if you mix the three together, three primary colors, you get a brown. And I'm just going to mix that together. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little area of that color in each of the pots of my primaries. That way, this brown color is in every primary color. I could stir that in together. And what that's going to do is that's going to put every color in your colors, and that's going to harmonize your colors. And you can do this for any in your palette. If you have a palette of 5 colors, do the same thing. Create this puddle of neutral and then put it back in your primary colors. And that will naturally harmonize your primary colors together. So you see that's a color trick. And you can do this even not just for watercolors, but you could do it for any kind of paint. So for tempera, for oil paint. But you see that kind of brings those 3 colors together naturally by adding that neutral. Okay. So just by setting that up, we're setting up the color for success. We're not using any outline colors, okay? At least not for now. If we find that we want to add another color, we can do that. We could do that later. You might want to harmonize that additional color too, you know, just by adding that little bit of that neutral. But sometimes if you want impact or contrast, you know, you can pick an outside color and then not harmonize it, and then that will make it stand out more in your picture. So, okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started then. And the very first thing, oh, I'm just going to change my water real quick because I used a lot of things. You want to always start with a clean water. And I'm just going to use the mop brush first to get this whole thing wet. I'm just going to just get the surface wet. Because the very first thing to do really is a wet on wet to get some of the base colors in. And then as it dries, becomes a timing game. Just letting things dry a certain amount of time so you can get a certain type of edge or whatnot. So she's still upset about it. Sorry about that. So I'm going to start with a color that I see that is sort of uniform throughout. And there's this light, this really light blue, I think is a really nice color to start with. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that blue that's in my pot here. A little bit of blue. I'm just going to start to kind of color in what I see here that has that color. A little bit in that water there. And I'm going to bring a little bit of that blue into the foreground. And then there's also a little bit of blue. And all I'm doing is just kind of dancing this mop brush with a little bit of color onto the surface. I'm kind of ignoring areas that are really, really white. Just kind of get a color down. Just very light. And really, I don't want to do too much more with this mop brush because I just got some nice color in there and I don't want to mess too much. You could stick with that brush though if you wanted. I'm just going to switch to a more rigid, soft brush. It's just a little bit more fully formed, and I have a little more control. And this is a filbert brush here. And I'm just going to add a little bit more dark. So I've got that blue already mixed here. I'm going to add a little bit of that brown mixture, that neutral. And I'm going to start to kind of go a little darker. And I'm moving in the direction of the land. So it looks like it goes into here a little bit. I'm just going to put that darker bluish grayish color that I got going on here along the edge of that water. But I don't want to do too much in the foreground. A little bit of a dark there that I can go ahead and put in. So I was going to mix that blue in there anyway. I'm going to just kind of darken in where some of this is in the back, the mountains here. And then this area here in the foreground part of, or the middle ground part of where that slope is, it gets a little more brown and yellow. So I'm going to leave that alone. And then I'm going to, because the sky is still a little wet, I'm going to kind of dance in a little bit more of this cloud cover here. That's a good start. And again, your brush stroke should reflect the direction that the earth is moving here. I'm just going to soften those clouds a little bit more. Then we get a little bit darker. So again, I'm mixing that neutral in with that blue again. And I'm just gonna see what that's a little bit more brown. And that's okay. I'm just going back in. That slope there. It's dark again. I leave that area because that's a highlighted area where you can see some of the yellows and the browns. And then you got a little bit of stuff happening here where it can get a little darker along this edge. Because I see that it's a little more brown this time, I can start to add in some of these colors that are in the foreground for the road. And it looks like I'm just going to use a little bit of sparing as it gets light there. So you see, with every pass, we let things dry and we let things get a little darker. And you're letting the big brushes do the work first, right? Because as you go, you're going to want to get a little more refined and a little more refined. Okay. Gonna add a little bit more in the, oop, that's a little bit, we'll add more of the brown there. That's I might save that for, this color is a good in the background here, because that's a little bit more blue, but I'll let that blend in. So that's a cloud there. And add some of the little darker areas here in the clouds. There's a little bit more gray in the in those clouds, so we'll add a little bit of ivory black when we do our last steps. Don't do that yet. So we want to make sure we have all the color in before we start to add in really dark darks. Okay, so we're going to do one more pass, getting just a little bit darker as we go. So again, using that blue and using that neutral. But this time I'm going to get it even darker. And we're going to do one more pass. Okay, it goes in here. And what's nice is you can, at this point, it looks like this area is starting to dry, so you can get a crisper edge. That comes down in front. And we get a little bit more brown, so we can go ahead and some of these tracks. This dark area here that goes and has this imaginary line through the water. We're going to erase that pretty soon. Now just kind of dab in, as we got some drier areas now. Dry, sort of drop in just by dabbing, showing that that texture is changing here, that that's not smooth, by doing a little bit of dabbing to sort of start to build that texture up. Now, if you have a pencil line that you want to erase, like this line, I'm dying to erase it, but it's too wet right now. I don't want to have it smear or anything, so I'm going to wait till everything's completely dry before I erase. Okay. So I'm just going to switch gears a little bit to a smaller brush. And I'm going to start to punch in some of the darkest darks. so I can have some contrast now to start to read the push and pull of the dark versus the light. So I'm gonna take and make a really, really dark dark. So that's that blue and that brown together in equal parts. Gonna make a really dark, sort of a really dark color. And that's good. If it's not black, it's very, very close. Okay, and then I'm gonna put in where I see the darkest darks. So if I look very carefully at this picture, we've got some darks that are kind of coming in, come down like this. And again, my paper's still a little bit wet, so it's going to do a little bit of a bleed, and that's okay. I'm not upset about that. And then there's some really dark darks there. And then it kind of carves into this edge here. And they're kind of rumbly. There's some dark darks there. There's a real dark dark here. And I'm just kind of, this is more of a dry brush. I've kind of wiped off. And I'm just going to dab in some of this texture again of the rocks. Just adding some really high contrast and putting in those darkest darks so I can start to add in and let things dry and and then be able to read this a little easier. And that's darker too. Excuse me. And then I'm mixing that blue, that darkest blue, and that neutral. I'm just trying to find the darkest darks in this landscape. Don't forget to vary your brush marks, so because you kind of want this to read as earth, right? So, and there's really no straight lines in nature. I mean, I'm sure there's some, but for the most part, there's no really rigid lines in nature. So I'm just gonna bring this down a little bit more. When you use a dry brush, you can kind of see how you can see the texture come through. And then that's a real hard edge there. So I'm gonna make sure I don't get too close to that because my paper's still a little bit wet. So there is a little bit of a bleed still. You can kind of see as it's drying, it's starting to diffuse. And then we've got some stuff that's going on here. And that also has a rough texture, so because I've got a little bit on my brush, I can sort of, this is a little darker, so I can go ahead and blend that in. Like this band of color here that I'm going to try to avoid, that you can kind of see here. And that's the color of the soil is a little bit blue, so I want to kind of not mess with that too much. But you can kind of see there's texture there. That kind of comes down. That's real dark. And there's a little with here where it kind of comes down into like a little peak and across. And I'm just gonna work with that a little bit. And then get that in another pass. Ooh, I did not mean to do what I did there. What is that? Oh. I'm starting to work with these little magic erasers. They're kind of fun. They're kind of easy to pick up. They're easy to pick up some lines. You see, I just picked up that one little brush stroke. So I wanted to keep that clean. Magic erasers work really well for that. Okay. I'm just gonna soften some of these edges here. So you see, just by using a dry brush, you can get this texture, and that works really well with this, with the soil there that's on the road there. So getting in my darks and my lights, and putting in a little bit of texture. Again, this is just a dry brush. And I'm using the pigment and using the brush in the direction of the soil to kind of push in some of this darker color in the soil here. With see, I'm just kind of like pushing the pigment into the paper. Not a lot of water at all. kind of wiggling the paintbrush into the paper. Just adding a little bit more water, getting too dry. Kind of cleaning up some of this here. And that gets green and yellow. There's some subtlety in there. We'll get that at the very end too. So you see, we're only working with 2 colors right now, but look at the range that we can get. Okay. All right, so now we've got a little bit of this warm color, that yellowy color here. We kind of want to put some of that in. So we've got some here in this middle ground, and we got some here where the light is coming through and it's hitting that land. And then we got a little bit of that here. So we're going to go ahead and put that in as well. And that's just a little bit of this yellow that we mixed with the brown. And maybe just add a little bit of that brown. Because you see that in the sunlight, that color also needs to go down into the shadow. So push that down in there too. And you can kind of see how it goes. There's a mountain range behind this one, so you kind of want it to kind of blend in a little bit. Just pushing that color up. You're going to put it on both sides, kind of uniform both sides there. I taped this down so you can kind of see you're going to have a nice hard edge at the end. I'm just kind of adding that color there. And then there's some of that color that comes down here. There's just a little bit of that you see. And you can go ahead and put that all the way across. So just adding that little bit of yellow really changes the feel of this composition, right? Because you've got a range now of a little bit of warm and a little bit of cool. It's really dark there, so I'll have to work on that too. You've got this little shock of yellow that's kind of fitting in really nicely. And I'm just going to add a little water and kind of tie that in a little bit more. Just put in a little bit of that color. Just in a little bit of areas here. So it kind of shows throughout the piece, except in this area, right? Because you want to warm up the middle ground and the foreground to leave that background atmospheric and cooler. Uh, I'm gonna switch brushes real quick, and I'm gonna just put in that blue. Um, that blue is kind of, it's not unnaturally kind of blue. So if you had like a cerulean blue, that would be kind of nice because it's just different enough. Um, but I'm just gonna stick with the colors I have. And let's see, I'm gonna add, what am I doing here? So I just want to test out a good, okay. So what I did was I added a little bit of, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do blue and a little bit of yellow, a little bit of yellow, blue. So I kind of get sort of a tealy color, and I want to paint that in. Let me just make sure. I think I'm okay with that color. Just want to make sure. Um, but you want to put that in. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to paint, oop, goes all the way across that line. And then it disappears. And it kind of comes, I just realized my soil is a little low. Because that's a little bit, that shows as water, I kind of want a dry brush. I'm going to dab it and then, because I want that paper to make that color for me. So I made that water a little fat. I have to bring that down. Guess I can bring, you know what? I will. I think I'll bring up this line. And I have to make sure I define that really dark. There's some dark is there. And then I'm going to add, now that I've got that dark there, I might as well keep going. I'm seeing now, there's some areas in my middle mountains that can get a little darker. Just following those lines, and then I'm going and adding it to the soil next to the water. This is much darker. So I'm gonna have to meet that line that I made in the beginning. Yeah. Okay. And then get some extra darks here that I can add to the soil, the drive here. Again, utilizing my dry brush to get that texture down the way I like it. I can kind of add in some of that here too. And all I'm doing again is I have a lot of, I've got pigment on my brush. I have little water, and I'm just taking and I'm just kind of pushing into my paper, pushing the pigment into my paper and kind of going in the direction of the soil. Because I made that line, I need to kind of make colors match. So I'm going to add a little bit of that yellow where I recreated that water line. So really utilizing the paper. Get the okay. So then I'm going to keep going. This time I'm going to add a little bit of red to my dark. So I'm adding red to that brown, a little bit of blue. And I'm going to go back in because this is another layer. Adding a red is another dark tone, is a dark value. You may not think that because it's red, right? It's kind of, you would think it's a light color, but actually red is a dark color when you think of value. So I'm just going to take that red, mix a little bit of that neutral, a little bit of that blue, and I'm going to now redefine my edge because now it kind of matters. I want to clean up all these edges here. Bring that down. It's really dark. So making more of a purple here now. It's a little darker. Having that come down. Finding that edge there. Utilizing that paper again. And same here. So on this edge. Yeah, and that's really dark there. There's so many subtleties in the picture. There's some darker areas here. Dark areas there. I'm just gonna clean up that dark there. I'm gonna just take a little bit of water here, kind of blend in. I got, and I'm gonna work in some of this soil again. All those little marks we made in the beginning, we can start to form around them. There's more contrast, remember, in the foreground. I'm barely touching the surface, and I'm just kind of, like I said, working with the dry brush and making the paper do the work. A little darker there. I mean, you can't go wrong with, if you're making brown, right? And you're in your painting, you can't go wrong with, like I said, mixing the three primaries together. But then really, what's beautiful about watercolor is you can mix these colors on the surface, and because you're not adding black and you're creating value with just the colors, you get a lot of beautiful little extra, you know, little extra surprises in your on the surface. Because if you look at it really up close, look at all that little range of color there. And I didn't even add black. It's just those three colors mixed together. Then you have interesting color. That's why I always say use black for a very last resort. And I just add some, oops, do that. It has a little more yellow in it. Just keep with the dry brush, and that texture will start to emerge. That pencil mark is dry, so I want to erase that. There's a couple little erase marks. This guy, maybe it's not all that dry. Not all that dry. Oop, not all that dry yet. I want to make sure they're really, really dry. This guy looks like in the sky might be okay to erase. Okay. All right. What are we doing on time? Oop, am I almost out of time? Does that say 11:30? We got a half hour. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So here's what we're going to do with our last half hour is we are going to clean up these areas and we're going to add our clouds, make them a little bit darker. So I've got a little bit of a purple mixed in here, but I want to make it more of a blue. And I'm not adding any yellow back here because that's in the very background. But I want to sort of find my edges here. Is that little light area. And then that comes down. And just a little bit more water. So that the ridge line is sharp. Now that it's dry, we can make it even tighter. And just gonna add a little bit of extra color here, blend it in a little bit. I'm gonna take my tape off because I think I'm not that I'm done, but I just want to see what it looks like without the bleed. And when you're working with masking tape, oop, I shouldn't have done that. You make sure you always you always remove the masking tape, pulling the tape away from the picture. Hold up. Okay. And then you do the same thing here. Taking the tape off is so satisfying. But it's nice because you want to see like the clear white behind it. I want to see how far you've gotten in terms of your value. Okay, so there's my picture. Now I want to clean up. I want to finish cleaning it up because I've got the white now to contrast with it. Okay. The first thing, I mean, you start to see like the things start to pop out right away when you have the white to expose next to it. Um, so first thing I want to do is there's some darker areas I want to fill in again. So this time I'm going back in that neutral, going in that blue. I'm saving the water for last because that's sort of like the big surprise of the picture is that it has like a shocking color. So I want to go in, clean up my shoreline here. Comes down. That's a little darker here too. And again, I'm following the line of the land. And this little guy gets darker here. A little bit of a line. And there's still some areas here that can be worked. Again, working in with that dry brush. Oh, did I do that already? Oh my gosh, look at that. I already messed up my edges. To get rid of that, all I'm gonna do is diffuse that with some water and blot it with a paper towel. And then when that dries, I'm gonna go back in with that magic eraser. It's an easy way to pick it up. Oh my gosh, and I did that over on this side too. See, I keep thinking that there's I'm thinking that there's tape still, and it's not. So I need to put that tape back. And I'll let the magic eraser pick that up too. Now at this point, like I said, first thing we can do is we can just add a little bit more of the cloud cover. Dang it. This is why tape is important to me. I'm a messy painter. I have a way of making things spread. So just adding some of that extra color here. It's a little darker back there than I have, so I'm gonna just add a little bit of tone to get that a little darker. Yeah. And then we've got this. Try to clean up those edges there. There's that edge along the waterline is a high contrast, and that's going to make that white pop. That color back. And that blue is really dark here. There's a line that I don't have that cerulean color. I'm just going to use the ultramarine blue. The color comes all the way across. And then I'm drying my brush, right? Because I want to do a dry brush. And of course, I messed up that edge again. That's a tip, guys. Don't take the tape off until you're finished, because if you're an artist like me, you don't pay attention to those edges. So as you get lost, I'm gonna just make that a little darker up here. It's the same reason why I ruin all my clothes. It's like I'll step in the studio, start to paint, and forget what I'm wearing. It's the same thing, I guess, with tape now. I'm learning things about myself. See if I can pick that up. It's a little darker. Right. I think we have a couple of minutes. We have about 15 minutes. And what I would do with those 15 minutes really is continue to add. If you wanted to, you can add some of the white back. I do have this Chinese white.
We have two questions, Jen.
Okay.
One is, what is a mop brush? And the other is, when do you use a dry brush?
Okay, great questions. Okay, so a mop brush is a brush that has, it's a very fluffy brush. Okay. So if you can imagine like your makeup brushes, like your blush brushes are a good example of like a really good mop brush. It's thirsty. It's a thirsty brush. It'll take in a lot of water when you dip it in. It'll absorb a lot of water. And then it's, it works sort of like a mop, right? You could press it down and get water down. But you can also use it like a sponge, right? You can take out the excess water and then lift up just like a mop would. So that's a mop brush. And then what was the other question? I'm sorry.
When do you use a dry brush?
When do you use a dry brush? So that's a good question too. Dry brushes are usually, you can, there's so many times that it could work in your favor, but for the most part, dry brushes are for texture and for trying to bring out, just like I was doing, I was sort of scrubbing in pigment and not using a lot of water. And what that did was it helped to bring up some of the texture of the paper. So that's when you should use a dry brush, is when you're trying to take advantage of a surface, and you would use less water to sort of help make that surface work for you. So that is when you would use a dry brush. And the other time you would use a dry brush too, and this is probably like an acrylic or oil, is when you're sort of getting ready by doing an underpainting, or you're adding sort of some first shapes or first lines. You could use a dry brush for that too, because you're going to cover over those lines, and you want to make them sort of light. But I would say those are the two really good times you can reliably use a dry brush method. Essentially just to work over and get the surface, work on a surface and bring a surface forward. Good questions, guys. And don't do what I did. Keep your tape masked.
So Jen, is there a way to clean that up or not?
Yeah, so when this dries, what I'm gonna do is these magic erasers work really, really well. So I just get it a little bit wet, just like you normally work a magic eraser. And then I would probably retape it and then work on that edge. But I'm gonna wait till it's all completely dry, because
Yeah.
nothing good is gonna happen when it's wet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So just wait till you're done to take the tape off then, is that it?
Yeah, wait to the very end. I was a little too anxious and eager. So you could tell, like I've got my little, it shows.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
That's a
Okay,
great way for us to learn too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I make mistakes all the time. And that's part of the process, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes
Right.
making mistakes is like the best thing to ever happen to your work, because
It is.
you're like, wow, I didn't realize, if you're so focused on one thing and you make a mistake, it takes you in a whole different direction, because you have to
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really terrific.
It was. Thanks for everything. Always learning.
yay. Thanks, guys.
Always.
Thanks,
Y'all
Jen.
have a great Monday.
Have a great day.
Pleasure working with y'all. Take care.
See you
Thanks.
next time. Have a great
Bye.
day.
I'm gonna email it to you. Okay, Jen?
Okay. That sounds great. Thanks, Renee.
Thank you. Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.